Seattle's Morning News. This is Dave Ross with Colleen O'Brien and Chris Sullivan. As you know, Washington State's been releasing prisoners because of a COVID outbreak at the Monroe Detention Center. But there's an organization that thinks that this is not being done the right way. Jeff Clayton is the executive director of the American Bail Coalition. And normally your concern is with reforming the whole bail system, right?
Well, normally we work on bail reform issues, not involving the COVID virus. Reform of the monetary bail system primarily is what we normally work on.
So you feel there are cases where bail has become just plain punitive?
The example the ACLU of Colorado in my home state always gives is sleeping on a park bench. You've done it 10 times, and the bail's $50 because you never show up. But what are we really going to do with this person anyway? Jail's not a potential penalty. What are we really doing? And so these are basically just these low-level, I call them nuisance crimes, drinking in public, that type of thing, simple trespass and camping. And
so you're saying stop setting bail for cases like that?
I think so, because, there's no reason to really keep him in jail if ultimately we're not going to jail him at the end of the day anyway. And we all know it's a social problem more than it is that we need to be more punitive on some of these people.
But in this present situation, where Washington State has been releasing hundreds of inmates for fear of a spreading coronavirus infection, you feel they've been way too lax. So tell me what you would do in this case.
Well, I wouldn't do what Washington State's doing. I mean, you've got, 12 confirmed cases as of Friday in the State Department of Corrections facilities. We're going to release 1,100 inmates. We're going to call them nonviolent, even though as I look at it, there were 71 firearms offenses in the first batch of commutations. But what I would have done is I think either employ the Intermediate Sentencing Review Board or some administrative authority to actually look at these guys and see who they are. One of the firearms cases, the guy had 24 prior court cases, 8 cases in a 1-year period prior to being sentenced to the Department of Corrections. So to just put out charges and sheets and start letting people out is ridiculous, particularly when you only have 12, cases, 11 of which come from one single facility in the state of Washington.
So you feel this has been way too haphazard then?
I do, particularly in Washington State. There's been no individual consideration of any of these defendants, at least in any public process where like a victim of crime could challenge it. For example, Terrence Hedrick Guy was released from King County, possession of firearm 1 charge. In his case, he was a prior domestic violence offender, picked up 15 cases since July 2nd of 2015. And we're going to say he's safe to release, and we need to release him because of the virus. And the other thing is, when we release these people, the two things that drive new crimes are lack of housing and lack of employment. And this is a really hard time to get housing and employment right. So I'm not sure this is going to help containment whatsoever.
Now, you mentioned getting victims involved. So as far as you know, these inmates who were released, their victims were not consulted first?
As far as I know, yeah. And there was no court proceeding. I mean, these are administrative orders from the Department of Corrections flowing from the governor's authority to declare an emergency. And so, when Terrence Hedrick Guy gets out, which he already has, will that protection order still be in effect? Will the victim know that? Is he going to respect that? These are all questions that a judge sitting in open court didn't make a decision on.
Now, we're not unique here in having to release prisoners. Are there states which are doing it the right way, in your opinion?
I think so. And I think Pennsylvania was probably the best example, which is, hey, follow the CDC guidelines. They don't call for releases of prisoners. They call for specific actions to be taken. And if you can't meet the CDC guidelines, come back, let us know that, and then we can help you take some action to release some of these people. In the case that, 1, you have a pandemic in the facility, and 2, that you can't comply with the guidelines. And it looks like the only one in Washington State is Monroe Correctional Complex, which has 11 of the 12 cases, in the system. So the answer is individualized consideration, not just sweeping broad orders that we need to release people. And, a court in Texas denied an overbroad order and said, look, we also have to take into account public safety. I mean, that's why these people are there in the first place. To put out in the newspaper in Washington State that these are nonviolent cases is ridiculous. I mean, look at the list. There's burglaries. There's 71, as I said, 71 firearms offenses on the commutation list, stolen cars, hit and runs causing injuries, burglaries. There's a couple assault to police officers. I mean, there's a lot of violent charges in here.
So what would you like to see Washington State do from this point?
Well, I think they've already done it. I would say stop, but it sounds to me like they pretty much have already done what it is they're going to do. And with the flattening of the virus and everything, they're probably just going to say this is it. The problem is, I think there should be some accountability as to what happened when these people are released, and we should find out what the impact was so that we know next time that, maybe this wasn't the best of ideas. So there needs to be some accountability. That's what I would call for.
So while your normal thrust as an organization is to prevent bail from being used to essentially harass street people who have no place else to go, in this case, you think the state hasn't been tough enough in the decision to release all these prisoners?
When we're talking about the governor and we're talking about the Department of Corrections, we are talking about hardened, convicted offenders, not homeless guys, using drugs in the street. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about 71 firearms offenses where they have prior violent crimes, which is why they couldn't have a firearm. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about burglaries when people are breaking into other people's houses to commit a felony against them or their property. That's what we're talking about here. And that is 1,100 offenders that are going to run wild. And I think the state owes it to the public to tell us what happened because of that. Because I don't think the emergency of 12 incarcerated individual cases, from 11 of which from one facility, was enough of an emergency to do this.
Jeff Clayton is the executive director of the American Bail Coalition. Jeff, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.